It's a tremendous honor for me to be able to address you while you're here in Utah. I just want to tell you a little bit of background. We spend less per student than any state in the nation, but it's not because we're not committed to students. It's because our student body almost all attend public schools. We don't have the 12 or 15% typical number that attend parochial or private schools. And we have very large families. So all of that tied together, even though we spend in the range of 60% of our finances on education, it doesn't go as far. Well, it does go far. Our schools are doing a great job. We are one of the, I think, 6th most urban states in the nation. You don't think of Utah as an urban state, but most of our population is centered along big economic areas. So we have the efficiencies of very, very large school districts. We have, I guess, 80% plus of our students are in districts of 20,000 or more. So we have districts of 60, 70,000 students typically, and that creates some efficiencies in the administrative overhead. And we have the lowest administrative overhead of any state in the nation. So we're trying to put the money best we can. And that's why digital learning is so important. You know, I've been pushing for technology in the classroom for all 20 years I've been in the legislature. And I've made some huge mistakes along the way that I've learned from. 6 or 8 years ago, when we had surpluses, you remember the days of surpluses? Well, I fought for $60 million to play catch-up in educational technology. Now, $60 million in a state our size is a huge amount of money. It was one-time money. It was a pot of one-time money we had, and I fought to get it. And I couldn't have been more disappointed. Just one example of how it was spent. Freedom Elementary in my Senate district was designed from the ground up to be a high-tech elementary school, Utah's first. Today, their scores are 10 points below their sister school in Highland with exactly the same demographics because the educators didn't know what to do with the money, and they gave every student a one-to-one device, a MacBook, and it became a distraction to learning. I went down there thinking they were going to be doing great things, wanting to see what had happened in my district. I mean, it was only fitting that I got the $60 million, and now this first high-tech elementary school is in my district. Not a single tool for delivering the core curriculum was used on any single computer. There were no apps. There were no computer-assisted instructional software. Nothing. I said, so how did you decide what to do with these? Well, we had a team that sat down and we looked at it and we opened up the computer and asked the question, what's in there? So they didn't start with the curriculum in mind. They started with the device in mind. And they wanted to know, what does this device do? They said, well, it has GarageBand recording. We'll teach kids to do that. It has PowerPoint. We'll teach them to make presentations. It has a keyboard. We'll appropriately teach them to keyboard better. And it has internet connectivity. We'll teach them how to search the internet. Plus, we'll avoid textbook costs. 5 things from one device. Isn't this amazing? It was a disaster, and it is to this day because they didn't know what they were going to do with it to improve the core curriculum. And that's why you need to start with the end in mind. You need to start with enhancing math, literacy, science, social studies. How can we do that? And then you back up and say, let's get the device that will deliver those things and the software that will deliver those things. So every district got their share of that money, and today I can't tell you what good it did. $60 million. Well, I learned better. And the way I learned was when I traveled to China. I was invited to speak to 1,000 of the world's leading college students. A third were from Russia, a third from the US, and a third from China. And I had just finished reading Thomas Friedman's The World is Flat. And so I was really concerned about American decline. Well, I was even more concerned when I met those Chinese students, because those Chinese students, in their discourse, in their engagement, in the way they were focusing on their futures, made the American and Russian students look like middle school kids compared to college students. It was that drastic of a comparison. So on the plane home, I have to admit, I was a little bit numb. And I wondered, what could I do to help Utah students elevate their perspective in a world climate? So I decided to sponsor legislation to have our high schools offer critical languages. All of the foreign languages we had been learning in Utah were all the languages of our history. And I decided, let's look at what the Defense Department and the State Department say are critical for Americans to learn, typically the languages of Asia and the Middle East. And so we offered a small amount of money for 20 high schools to offer critical languages. When the governor signed the bill, we learned that day that class registrations for high school in the coming fall had ended 3 weeks before the bill was signed. And I thought, we're going to have to wait a whole year. Not so. When the news got out, and the news covered it, believe me, when the news got out that we had this available, all 20 slots for 20 high schools were snapped up within 2 weeks. And the classes filled up, even though class registration had ended 3 weeks previously. There was that much pent-up demand. Now, I dare say that the school boards, half the school board members, I'll bet, had read The World is Flat, but not a single one had said, let's start teaching critical languages. As a result, and the next year, we offered legislation to have dual immersion so that children in the class for half of the day in elementary, starting at kindergarten or first grade, would learn the foreign language and speak that only for half of the day, every day. As a result, we now have 11,000 students. We graduate 30,000 a year, to put it in this perspective. We have 11,000 students learning Mandarin Chinese. More than any state in the nation, more than states 20 times our size. It was a tiny little incentive. You know how much that incentive was? It was $6,000. One-time money. Just saying, does anyone want to try this for $6,000? It basically paid the cost of the materials to make the transition. From that, I learned that educators are highly competitive, even though you exist in a government-type monopoly, or you can't go out of business. So you live in a world that we don't think is competitive. But in your hearts, when you hear of a grant, you move heaven and earth to show we can do this. Our kids deserve it. We can implement it optimally. We can make it work. And so from that, we learned that the best way for the legislature to give incentives for digital learning was to offer grants for that type of thing to occur and let schools compete for it. And boy, did they compete. We now have, as you know, ELL software for every ELL student in the state. And that is the only subgroup of student that is showing marked, consistent improvement in all subject areas. That's the only subgroup that is showing that kind of increase. And I attribute it to these kids being on those headsets for 45 minutes a day and learning English exponentially faster than they were. It used to take 4 to 5 years for a kid to be really fluent in English because they return home to their foreign-speaking families and they don't get that immersion that they should be having. It's amazing what happens when they get adaptive, individualized instruction with those headsets. So we've gone even beyond that. This year, we had legislation to give 30,000 licenses to schools for K-1 early intervention. Because we've realized if you don't get kids on par by third grade, that is the trajectory for the rest of their lives. And you know that better than I do. So we offered these 30,000 licenses. 6 vendors more than 6 were competing for it, but 6 were filtered out. And now we have these 30,000 licenses being deployed. The week before the legislature started, I visited a half a dozen of these schools with different products going on. And I'll tell you, those kids, have you already visited some of those schools? Oh, so I won't go on that. I was just amazed at how quickly they transitioned from one group to the next. I mean, it's like 10 or 15 seconds is all that is downtime for those computers, because that's precious time. And did you notice those kids, while they were on there, they weren't paying attention to you. They didn't compare themselves to the other kids in the reading group. The stress, the tyranny of the reading group is done away, the stress that is done away because of this individualized instruction. You know, what I found is that digital learning tools can remove teachers from being manual laborers in 19th century classrooms and assign the tasks of skill building and even content knowledge building to an individualized instructor that is infinitely patient, infinitely positive, and then you, as teachers, can engage in the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. The idea of learning to make evaluations, learning to synthesize, learning to collaborate, to create. Those are the things where teachers receive greater fulfillment anyway, rather than one more year, I'm going to give that same lesson plan and be the voice, that tape recorder, if you will, trying to get the sound out into the airwaves, entering the ears of the children, and hopefully having that information lodge in the brains of the children. It's such a manual task that can be better delivered in most areas through digital learning means, and we have such advances that are being made now, and it's really encouraging to see that it's this competitive world, we're getting real improvements in these kinds of things. You know, this Utah study of these 6 vendors that were chosen for those 30,000 licenses, the schools are competing. They're making sure that they're implementing it optimally. And the vendors are giving special attention because they know that at the end of this school year, the University of Utah will be doing an independent third-party study of the results of these 6 different products. And the world is going to be looking at how they did side by side with these student populations. I'm so excited about that. I have kind of a sense of which products are going to be produced the best, but man, I'm willing to see what the science shows. Just in the couple of minutes that I have left before I take questions, let me just tell you, I was attending a brain research conference in San Diego a few years ago, and that's where I had an epiphany about why digital learning is so important in assisting educators in doing what they do best. And by the way, the first thing I tell teachers is digital learning tools will never replace a human teacher, any more than an electronic spreadsheet replaced a CPA, or any more than a CAD system replaced an engineer. They're just tools to enhance your effectiveness. But what I learned in this brain research conference was that the way the human brain, and you can look this up, Dr. Martha Burns is the one who was giving the presentation, and it was just amazing to me. She noted that in the human brain, the way intelligence is formed is by making an attempt, making a choice. Whether it's throwing a baseball or whether it's learning reading or math, you have to make the attempt and then get a confirmation back as to whether you were correct or incorrect. Remember Piaget, one of the pioneers in educational psychology, said 80 years ago that anyone of normal intelligence can be highly proficient in math or exact science if they get immediate interactive feedback. but we don't give that much. We send kids home to cry over their algebra homework and try their best and then get a score back a day or two later. That would be like, let's imagine a baseball pitcher practicing his throws. And with every release of the ball, his vision is cut off so that he cannot see where the ball goes. And imagine then, after 20 throws, you then give him a sheet, printout, of the inventory of where in the strike zone or outside the strike zone the ball went. Do you think by giving him that sheet, showing him how he did, is going to inform anything about his throwing? You need the immediate feedback with each throw so that you can then adjust. And that is what the power of digital learning tools do. They give that immediate feedback. What she said was that anytime you make an attempt, the dendrites of the neurons reach out and form potential intelligence. The only way that becomes intelligence is when you get feedback as to whether you were correct or incorrect, proximate or distant to what your goal was. And when you get that feedback, the brain releases 3 chemicals to seal the connection. And now you have intelligence. One of those chemicals is dopamine. And that is what makes learning joyful. We as humans, from the moment that baby is born, and as they start to reach out for that object and put it in its mouth, which is a laboratory at that age, we are learning creatures. That's who we are. That's how we receive our greatest joy, is in learning, experimenting. These little laboratory scientists who are dropping things and breaking them, they have to test gravity 1,000 times to prove that it works every time. And then they let go of that helium balloon and they think, wow, my theory has just been destroyed. But that's who we are. But then these little scientists enter kindergarten, and they are commanded to stop that self-directed learning. It's disruptive to my Pavlovian classroom. This digital learning restores that agency, that self-will, that drive of the child, and gives them that immediate feedback which forms that intelligence. And that's why I'm so passionate about this. That's why I've been speaking around the world, around the nation, and even in England, so I guess around the world, on these ideas of digital learning. We have to be willing to move into the 21st century and respect these learning creatures, these precious children who desire deepest in their heart to learn at their pace as quickly as they can. And that's what digital learning empowers in each of them. Whenever I'm among educators, there's an energy, there's a spirit. My mother was a second grade teacher, a single mom, raised 5 kids as a single mom, second grade teacher, and I respect her so much. She would come home from school at the end of every day. She would ask us to get out of the house for a half hour so that she could have her nap. She says, my nerves are shot, and I have to have my nap so I can be a mom the rest of the day. And that's where I learned about the Civil War. If we'd tiptoe in for a snack or something, somehow she could hear us. And she'd come out and say, it sounds like Sherman marching through Georgia. And that's how I learned about the Civil War. I also have 19 educators in my extended family. That's more than anybody I've ever met. So if you have more than that, I'd like to hear from you. I have to tell you, digital learning tools are a way that we're finding that we're able to do more with less. But we can never replace the teacher. Oh, I would like to do that. In fact, in Utah, our dual immersion program, we have 1% of the nation's population. We have 1/3 of all dual immersion programs in the nation. And it's expanding drastically. We have some parents who can't get their kids into the dual immersion because we have typically 4 classes per grade, and 2 of them will be dual immersion, and those teachers will flip halfway during the day. Those kids in those other classes, some parents are considering suing the state of Utah for their children not having that opportunity. These children are forever advantaged. They have 2 native languages. They don't have an accent in the foreign language because it is their native language. It's just as much as English is. It is amazing. As Americans, I think we really have to do more of this. And again, as I said, we only give $6,000 per classroom, and it's one-time money just to buy the materials. And then with each grade, as they advance, you have to buy the material again through 6th grade. And some of them are about to get into middle school, so we're going to have to accommodate them as well so that they don't lose that. They always are being challenged in that language as well as English. Oh, the other thing is that we found that the students in the dual immersion program, we expected them to score lower on the end-of-level tests. They're not. They're scoring higher. That's funny that you asked that, because when China found out about our bill, Asian cultures honor those who honor them. They feel an obligation to honor them. They contacted me and said, could we provide teachers for your classes? And so we now have about 40 teachers from mainland China paid largely at the Chinese government's expense. So China is subsidizing Utah schools, and they have come on 3-year rotations, and they return home having experienced America, and now they can teach their children in China about America from a realistic point of view. So it's really a bridge builder in a lot of ways. All I can say about digital learning tools is the world is changing quickly. And what I challenge you to do is to get the best products available. Get the data research stuff so that you're not just experimenting with stuff that is unproven. Because there's a lot of vendors out there, and not all vendors are created equal, not all products are created equal. But look at the data, look at what actually works, because these children deserve it. And heaven knows the hard-working teachers in America deserve modern tools, just like people in the business community do. Thank you.